This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. My name is Darshan Kulkarni. As you all know, the goal of this podcast has always been to talk about the life sciences, to talk about things that impact the life sciences. And one of the things that keeps popping up is the idea of privacy, the evolving and emerging role of privacy and the discussions around it and how that impacts the life sciences. And if you're in clinical research, if you are in marketing, if you're in PR, if you're a medical device that has patient data, every single one of you are probably impacted by the discussion around privacy. Along the way, I follow a lot of really interesting people on LinkedIn, and one of the most interesting people I follow is Avishai Ostrin. And Avishai is the head of privacy at Asteron. He is both a qualified privacy solicitor in England and Wales and also in Israel with a strong background in corporate and commercial law. And what we're discussing is really how this all comes together. And Avishai, before I jump into some questions, is there anything I missed? Would you like to answer any questions, clarify something I said or didn't mention?
No, I think that was, first of all, thank you very much, Darshan, for having me on the podcast, the chat. Always great to chat to friends all around the world. And that's what's amazing about this time that we're in now, is that it's so easy just to hop on a virtual chat and just have a conversation. So I love it.
You never quite got this chance before. Avishai, let me ask you. Let's put some things out of the way, because as lawyers we kind of have to worry about this. This isn't legal advice. So if you're interested and need legal advice, Avishai, where should they contact you?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I'm very, very active there. So just drop me a line and we'll get the conversation started from there. Perfect.
So let's start with a couple of different questions. So we had a very brief conversation, as you know, Avishai, before this starting the interview, and you talked to me about how you were born in Harrisburg, and yet here you are, a solicitor in Wales and the UK and in England, Wales, and also in Israel. How does that all come together? Why did you bring these pieces together from a global perspective? And yet you're both not only an expert in privacy, but also corporate and commercial. So how do you bring that all together?
Yeah, so you highlighted a bit of my split personality there. But yeah, born in the U.S., grew up in Israel, trained as a corporate and commercial lawyer, went to law school here in Israel, trained as a corporate and commercial lawyer, worked at one of the big firms. And like every good young corporate lawyer, I did really everything. I did, high-tech mergers and acquisitions, a bit of antitrust even, which was fascinating, and really fell in love with the area with privacy and data protection, and how technology and the law interact and sometimes clash with each other, and realized I wanted to have a career in this fascinating field. Looked around at the Israeli privacy regulations and realized they weren't really the gold standard of privacy around the world. And they were talking about this new emerging regulation called GDPR. Your listeners may be familiar with it, which is the privacy regulation that applies in the EU, that was supposed to be this new gold standard of privacy. And I said, great, let's do that. And so I found, I knew of a UK firm that was actually based here in Israel. So I applied to work there and got my English qualification, got my privacy knowledge up to date, and I really founded the privacy practice at Ostrin, which I had today. So that's my journey. My background is very much in law and with a commercial hat on, which is very important for anyone dealing in this area of privacy, because you have to be extremely, extremely commercial minded and understand, what the client is trying to achieve, not just what the law actually, what the black and white law tells you can do or you can't do, because a lot of it is about what goals you're looking to achieve, and so that's kind of my background. That's where I got to where I am today.
Which really, and your last sentence actually reminds me of something that I read about you. And you made this comment. You said clients aren't interested in legal advice; they're interested in outcomes and solutions. And I think that's so true, because my experience is when you talk to clients, they're coming to you with a problem. They don't care how you solve the problem. They want to know that they're solving the problem, and that at the end of it, they're going to have something that they can hang their hat on. In your experience, what is the impact of your statement? What have you, when you see young lawyers coming up and they are, let's say, becoming privacy experts, and they say that, this is what the law says. How do you guide them and advise them to do better?
Yeah, so it's true. It's actually something that applies to the entire legal profession, not just to privacy, but it's true especially in privacy. I'll get into that in a second. But, we are as lawyers, we're so used to, we go to law school and we read the laws, and we read the case law, and we study everything, and we have all this legal knowledge. And the first instinct when someone comes to you and asks you for advice, because that's what you do, you give advice. The first instinct is to say, I have all this legal knowledge and I know all of these things. Let me give you all of that information in whatever format, a long email or a note or a legal opinion or whatever it is. But in the end, what the person has come to you for advice for is they want to know how to move forward. So they want to know whether they can move forward with a clinical trial, whether they can, market this medical device, whether it's ready, whether it meets the standards and the regulations. Yep. And they don't really care about what the law says or what you studied in law school. And so flipping that mindset and saying, okay, what is this person actually trying to achieve, and how can I get them there faster? That is, in my view, and in the view of, the view that we have in the firm and in my team, that's exactly what legal advice really should be. And I said in the beginning that this is especially true about privacy, because if you look, for example, at legislation like GDPR, like the CCPA in the UK, and like other legislation that's coming out now, it's a lot of it isn't black and white. It's a lot of it is, take into account what the individual expects you to do with their data, what's fair and transparent, and these concepts that you need to actually, as a legal advisor, as a privacy professional, take and translate into a specific situation. So, for example, I had someone come to me, the other day and say, what does the law say? Can I do X? Yes or no? And that's all they want to know. Well, guess what? The law doesn't say, yes, you can do this. No, you can't do that. Right? And so that's where this understanding of trying to get people to the outcome that they want to get to, and trying to get them the answer and allow them to move forward, that's where this kind of mindset is extremely powerful, and I think is the correct way, and the appropriate way to give legal advice. It's really the only way.
The way I framed the answer to that question, I've been asked that, and it's going to echo exactly what you just said, which is I personally try to go from can I do X, Y, Z to how do I do X, Y, or Z, and that addition helps me at least rethink the question. But thank you, because that's a question that when I've been general counsel, I've seen that issue pop up enough times where you're going, this is all great information, but how does this impact what I do on a day-to-day basis? So let me ask you a different version of the question. You talked about how you have a really strong corporate and commercial background, and that's impacting your knowledge and your experience as a privacy attorney. My question to you is, when you're talking about companies of varying sizes, whether you're talking about a small emerging biotech, you're talking about a global, small emerging biotech of, say, initially funded $3 to $5 million, or a medium-sized generic company, say anywhere from $150 to $200 million in revenue, to a large pharma company, which is multi-billion dollars in revenue. How do you advise them differently when you're talking about the types of privacy considerations they should have? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. When I advise them, what I worry about is, can you handle it? But the rules don't change necessarily. So how do you play that out?
Yeah, it's a conversation. I mean, you really kind of hit the nail on the head with that one, because it's a conversation that I have on a daily basis. As you know, and your listeners may know, Israel has been dubbed the startup nation, right? I think we have more startups. We have the most startups per capita in the world, if not just second to Silicon Valley. But a ton of startups. And what that means is that, startups, obviously, one of the things they care about the most when they're building their product is that their product is compliant with the technological, whatever laws apply to that technology, which most often is privacy legislation. And as you rightly said, the privacy laws don't distinguish between, or at least I should say the European privacy laws, because CCPA, for example, does have certain thresholds which then apply certain responsibilities and liability. But at least in GDPR, the minute you're collecting information, any type of personal information, and personal information is a very, very broad definition, right? So the minute you're collecting any type of personal information, the law applies to you from A to, you said Z because I'm an English lawyer, I'm going to say Z, but from A to Z, right? All the way through. My parents will have to forgive me for that one. But so they apply completely, and it's true, and it's a big pain point for companies, because often this stuff can be very expensive to implement and a real pain when you're trying to build a small company. And so the way that I approach it with my clients is, I use one word: risk. Okay, what is the biggest risk for your company? So when you're talking about companies in the life sciences, people who are collecting health information. So let's say you have a startup that's that's starting to that's developing a product that is in the health tech sphere, right? They're developing a software product in the health tech sphere. So so in the beginning, the questions that I would ask them, for example, are, okay, so you haven't gone to market yet, right? So you're not collecting the information yet. So the risk isn't there at the beginning, but let's look at, when you do go to market, what information will you be collecting, and how can you design your product from day one to be compliant with, when you launch the product and when you do it. And that's the concept that we call it, in the privacy lingo, we call it privacy by design, right? You're designing your product in order to be privacy compliant from day one. And so, I often go through those exercises with companies. And then if you're talking about a mid-cap company, a mid-sized company, like you said, oftentimes it'll be about putting in place the processes and procedures. So they've come out of this small startup phase where everyone was running around doing everything, right? The CEO was on the line doing sales and was also doing the marketing. They were everyone was doing everything, and there were no processes, and it was just like, we need to survive, right? Yeah. So you move out of that mode, and then you become a viable company. You may have gotten an investment from a serious investor, and people are starting to say, okay, what have you put in place in terms of processes and procedures to make sure that you guys will be, continue on the journey in a compliant manner. So then you start looking at things like internal privacy policies and processes to evaluate new technologies or new features to your technology, or, if it's a company that's going to a clinical trial, you might have some work around doing something like that. But then it really becomes about laying the foundations for that. To build a building, you need to obviously lay the foundation.
Right.
And then I also have, very, very, very large clients. And the challenge there from a privacy perspective is very interesting in the sense that then it becomes an issue of making sure that everyone knows what the other person is doing. So you have the small startup where everyone's doing everything. And then you have the large, enterprise corporate that with, thousands of employees, and you could have a department that's just completely oblivious to the fact that you've put in place this new policy and they're just kind of off doing their own thing. And because they're so big, they're not necessarily talking to each other. So then it becomes another challenge of kind of training, monitoring, making sure that, the different parts of the organization speak to each other. So, as you said, the different sizes of corporate kind of have posed different risks or different challenges from a privacy perspective and need to be treated a little bit differently. But in the end, it's all about getting to that cohesion and making sure that everyone's kind of following what you set from the top.
Now, I think that's a really interesting point where you talk about the different companies. One of the things when I'm advising clients, I often struggle with from that initial risk perspective that you mentioned, especially when you're in the startup phase, is I often land up advising companies that are going to have some version of a bolt-on product going onto someone else's system. If that's true, those individuals are then looking at, am I going to be okay connecting to this other company's system because they're a much larger company, they already have policies in place, and they're going to want to audit us. So when you're advising companies like that, where funding's already a major issue, how do you advise them on here's how we can bolt on and yet still manage and control your costs? Do you still look at it from a risk perspective, or do you say these are non-negotiables?
Yeah, I mean, I think that inevitably, when you have this kind of David and Goliath kind of situation, you're gonna have to have a sensible approach to your privacy program, right? So you're gonna say, okay, this is what we expect to be doing, but then you may get a large corporate that you come and you're selling to, and they're saying, guys, listen, if you want to do business with us, this is the way we do business. So It's really nice that you have these policies in place, but you're just going to have to adhere to this, take it or leave it. And I think the risk approach here is also applicable because, and it becomes less about kind of risk of just how we operate in a vacuum to the risk of how do we make sure that we're covered from in terms of the allocation of the risk between the two parties, right? So the big corporate is going to have a certain amount of risk, and they're going to want to impose their policies onto you, right. And the corporate then needs the company that you or I are representing would need to say, okay, we wouldn't normally do things in this way, but we think that the risk of agreeing to 1, 2, 3, and 4, maybe we can live with. 5, on 5, we may be able to accept this, but we may need to increase our insurance premium, for example, because right. that's an exposure there that may, we may be able to cover with insurance. On 6, we may need to contract with a third party to make sure that we're detaching some of the risks that we have and adding it on to a third party. So it becomes about making, commercial lawyers or good commercial lawyers, I should say, know that they need to be deal enablers rather than deal breakers, right? So they need to say, okay, and this goes back to what we were talking about before about getting to where the client needs to be. So it's not about saying, looking at this long list of demands and saying, oh, no, there's no way we can do this. Forget about it. We're not doing the deal with Amazon or Google or, whatever. That's not going to happen. It's about, okay, let's see how we can do this while minimizing the risk that we have internally.
Great. Thank you. Now here's an interesting question, because one of the things I saw in your background that really spoke to me, and it's being echoed in exactly the conversation you're having with me, is you and in the conversation we've had a little bit earlier, you talk about how Israel's a startup nation. You talk about how you advise startups. But one of the things on your profile talks about you being a startup mentor. What does that mean to you, and what is that impact? What has been the impact of that?
Yeah, so a year, I think, or two ago, I joined. I was asked by a friend of mine who's she's a partner in a VC. She said to me, I mentor. There's an accelerator called Techstars, and what they do is every year they have a cohort of about 10 startups in Tel Aviv, and they you basically volunteer your time to come and mentor these startups. And they have people from all different backgrounds. So they have VCs and people, marketing people, salespeople, business development. And, I came and said, hey, would it be, helpful for you guys to have someone who understands privacy for companies that are building these small products and these new products? And I went to my first cohort and I met with all the startups and gave them advice. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my career to be able to see these little fledgling startups come and develop. Some of them, by the way, since have secured very, very impressive financing rounds, and I've stayed in touch actually with a number of them, and it's really, really amazing for me to be part of the Israeli tech ecosystem. I feel like I kind of did a little bit, gave a little bit back to this ecosystem, and it's extremely rewarding to be able to apply the skills that I've learned and developed over the years, and help these companies. We talked before about startups being strapped for cash and not necessarily having the means to be able to afford legal advice or mentoring during these critical times in their development, and so being able to be a part of that was absolutely amazing, and I consider it to be one of my it's extremely rewarding for me to be able to do that and kind of give back in that way. So
that was great. Avishai, I have to admit that we keep a tight time on this, and the conversation today has been about a lot of your experiences around startups. We've talked, as you know, about your experiences in guiding small startups, about your experiences mentoring them, talking about how you help them manage risk. What I'd love to do is maybe have you over again, and we can talk about larger companies. I'd love to talk about your experiences with data transfer agreements. I'd love to talk about the impact and implication on companies that are, for example, in the UK, and what is the impact of Brexit. I'd like to talk about Israel and its unique privacy law and what is the case study associated with that. Would you be open to coming back?
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest with you, Darshan, I think all the stuff that you listed, you may need like a day and a half to cover all of those topics. But listen, if we can, it would be absolutely my pleasure. I love having these chats, and I hope that your audience enjoys them as well. I would very much love to be invited back. It would be a pleasure.
Perfect. Thank you again, Avishai. Let's remind everyone, where can they find you again?
Yeah, so look me up on LinkedIn. I'm active there. You feel free to drop me a message, connect, engage. I'm extremely responsive. I never let a message go unanswered, so you'll definitely hear back from me if you contact me there.
Very cool. And thank you again for coming on. My name is Darshan Kulkarni, and this is Darshan Talks. Stay tuned for the next streamcast we're going to do, the next podcast we're going to do.
Thank you, Darshan.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.